Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new and you like to hear about opinions, reviews, and analyses on films, books, and TV shows, be sure to hit that subscribe button for more content from me. It's been a while since my last video. My semester was unexpectedly busy with assignments being due also close to each other. Anyway, this delayed posting of my video turns out to be a blessing in disguise because instead of reviewing only one episode of Moon Knight, I'll do a review on 3, which is basically half of the season. So before I continue, here's a little anecdote about my first experience with Moon Knight. So I was on Hinge back in 2019, it's a dating app. I put in my bio that I was a Marvel fan, and I matched with a guy who asked me if I liked Moon Knight. So at the time, I had no clue who Moon Knight was, so I was like, oh no, sorry, I don't know who he is. And the guy goes, you call yourself a Marvel fan and you don't know Moon Knight? So naturally, I unmatched and blocked him. Boys, it's not cute, like gatekeeping characters and reacting like that. The nice way to react would be to say, oh, you don't know Moon Knight? Well, he's so-and-so. Anyway, I don't really know much about Moon Knight going into the show, only the basics. That he's a vigilante, he has dissociative identity disorder with 3 alters, and he's Khonshu's avatar. That's literally all I knew going into the show. So I will go through each episode, giving each one a rating and my overall thoughts. This review will not be spoiler free, especially since by the time I post this video, the 4th episode would be out. So if you haven't watched Moon Knight yet, don't watch this video. So episode 1. I thought it was a pretty solid start to the story. We're starting with Steven and his semi-normal life, minus his blackouts and insomnia. We established that he's also completely obsessed with Egyptian mythology. In terms of its formal elements, I enjoyed it. There's a lot of handheld camera movements, especially in the beginning, giving it a shaky vibe. I initially thought that they must have chosen to use this technique to match with Steven's vibe, you know? Like, he's a jumpy kind of guy, so it makes sense that they'd used like handheld camera movements with him. Another thing I loved were these abrupt cuts to different places. Like, it's abrupt and confusing. We don't know how Steven got there, and neither does he. Another editing technique that I loved, the several cuts in succession that show Mark fronting while Steven has no clue what just happened. I thought that was just super cool and really speaks to the shock and confusion that Steven must be feeling. Another formal element I loved was the soundtrack.
Oh my god, there's so many of them.
I vibe with the soundtrack a lot, and the contrast of the song choice with the chase scene was just chef's kiss. Another formal element I loved was actually the lighting and the horror vibes at Steven's apartment. Even though it's dark and low lighting and again evokes horror vibes, you can still clearly see what is going on in the scene, which is blessed. That being said, I do love how even though there are some horror elements going on in certain scenes, they do balance some of it out with comedic relief.
By even her own avatar.
Avatars. Blue people. Love that film.
By avatar.
You mean that?
What I mean.
Anime.
So overall, because of the formal elements, I would give this episode a solid 8 out of 10. Actually, 8.5. I really love that they showed the comic accurate costume at the end of the first episode, and also the credits were just breathtaking. Now on to episode 2. What really blew it away for me was Oscar Isaac's acting. Like, that man is handsome as hell, and his acting skills were superb. So he plays 2 completely different characters, and it's not just the accent that sets them apart.
I know you're scared.
A bit, yeah.
I know you're confused. You weren't supposed to see any of this.
No, well, a bit late for that, isn't it? So what? Am I like meant to be some sort of mad secret agent or something?
So Steven is very confused and jumpy, while Mark is very calm and knows what to do. Even the way he carries himself as Steven, then as Mark, Oscar Isaac is just amazing. The storage room chase scene evokes more horror vibes, and some people had something to say about the use of a freeze frame. I think they must have used it to emphasize the fear that Steven was feeling when Khonshu was chasing him. This episode also gives us more background on Mark, finding out he's married, or at least in a complicated relationship with his soon-to-be ex-wife. Plus, we do find out more about Arthur Harrow, how he used to be Khonshu's former avatar, and now he's Ahmed's. Now, there are two things that people are criticizing in this episode. The first is Harrow's Mandarin speaking, and the second is Mr. Knight. I was only made aware of the Mandarin language being butchered through Instagram post because I don't speak Mandarin, but they really should have invested more into making sure that the language was accurate. As for Mr. Knight, I think it's mainly die-hard comic fans who didn't like his introduction. If I'm not mistaken, Mr. Knight is more suave and confident in the comics, but since Steven is Mr. Knight in the show, he's confused and not very skilled. I thought he was funny, and it's a pretty good starting point. I mean, Mark's already experienced as Moon Knight. It makes sense that we would see Steven's character development being tied to Mr. Knight's development as well. I also actually loved how often in this episode, Steven would admit that he needs help.
No, I'm not broken. Just need some help, maybe.
I just think that it's neat, destigmatizing poor mental health and allowing a male character to admit that he needs help. Another thing I loved in this episode was that it showed a different form of transition when Mark fronts. Instead of the several cuts in succession as seen in the previous episode, it's a very smooth transition done in just one take. That's an interesting editing choice because it's assumed that in the first episode, Mark fronts without Steven's consent. But after Steven consents and doesn't fight for control, it's very smooth. Episode 2, I would give an overall 7.5 rating. It's still pretty steady, but I gave it less points for the Mandarin mess-up. And now on to episode 3. So in this episode, we were given some backstory for Layla and given some pretty solid characterization for her, which I loved. There were still some handheld camera movements used, but it's not nearly as frequent as in the first episode. Most of the handheld camera movements seem restricted to action sequences. But also, guys, there's no yellow filter in Egypt. If you're confused as to what the yellow filter is, Hollywood uses it when they're trying to show that a setting is in a different country than America. Usually like Mexico, but also non-North American and non-European countries. And instead of going the normal route and showing only the markets and desert in Egypt, the episode contains shots of what I think is downtown Cairo, like showing the city. So that's amazing. The third episode also contains hints about the third alter, Jake Lockley. There's Mark blacking out, and neither he nor Steven know what's going on. I really hope that means that Jake will eventually show up in the show, because I want to see how he interacts with Mark and Steven. I also find it funny, by the way, how in a fight scene, Moon Knight's costume was used against him. I'm sorry, but it's hilarious that the bad guy was tugging on his cape. And just like in the previous episode, we do get two kinds of transition from Mark to Steven, as well as Mark to potentially Jake. There's the several cuts in succession when Steven and Mark were arguing over who should be in control. But at the end, when Mark consents for Steven to be in control, the transition is seamless yet distinct. Just the facial expression, and you can tell it's not Mark fronting anymore, that it's Steven. I also can't believe I'm saying this, but Khonshu was pretty good in this episode too. I mean, he was dramatic as hell at the beginning with the Enid, but he seems to be growing fond of Steven, especially when it's established that Steven has the brains while Mark has the muscle. Overall, this episode was a solid 8.5. The visuals were stunning, and the storyline was still pretty good in terms of pushing the plot and character development. So the first half of Moon Knight is really good. I'm absolutely in love with the visuals. And even though I'm not too familiar with Moon Knight, apart from knowing the basics, I don't feel confused. I also like that I don't have to have seen other MCU projects in order to understand the events of this one. Minus the mention of Madripoor, which is a minor connection to the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, it does feel like it's contained in its own little world. While I kind of want more shows with episodic episodes, which have like a different conflict and plot going in each episode that is then resolved by the end, I do think that serialized storytelling works for this show. It's reminding me of my obsession with Egyptian mythology, so catch me rereading Kane Chronicles soon. And if you were a fan of The Mummy, starring Rachel Weisz and Brendan Fraser, like I was, I think you'd greatly enjoy Moon Knight. And that's a wrap on Moon Knight. My next video is going to be up by early to mid-May, and it will be on Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness. Thank you so much for watching, and please don't forget to like, comment, or subscribe.